Hey guys, how you doing? This is my 2012 Road King Police that I got a couple months ago, probably at the beginning of the 2020 quarantine, and I can't praise this bike enough. This is an awesome bike, but unfortunately, one thing this bike does not have is cruise control. If I zoom in on the controls here, you can see it's got the turn signals, some of the red siren controls. They are pretty worn down. That isn't really the light that you're missing. And on the right side, you can see no cruise control. So that's the one thing that I miss on this bike. But luckily, with the quarantine now coming around, I got a lot of free time and I decided I'm gonna make this video showing you guys how I added, or how I'm going to add, factory cruise control to this bike for under $50.
Alright, so we're going to take a turn for a moment and look at the computer for a second as I kind of explain my plan here. So what you see right now is the Harley-Davidson cruise control kit that they sell to add cruise control to their bikes that were not originally uh, equipped from factory with it. The thing is that this kind of kit will not work on police bikes. That's because police bikes are actually wired different from the factory than regular bikes. From 2014 up, police bikes actually started shipping with cruise control, but from 2013 down, they did not. This is a diagram of a 2012 Road King Ecm. This is a standard version, so you can see how pins 22, 34, and 35 have the cruise control, pins going right into the ECM to control cruise control. This is an ECM from my bike, my 2012 Police Road King. There is absolutely nothing here on the wire pinout because in the actual bike, these pins are not used. There's no wires going to these pins. They are in software still cruise control pins, they're just never used. So attaching something to this bike and plugging it in would do nothing because there's actually no wire support for those extra cruise control buttons. But luckily, there's still a solution. Dracula here, Dracula 951 on the Harley-Davidson forums in 2013 made a post describing how you could actually rewire these siren buttons on your bike, the siren on and off switch and the siren momentary switch. You could actually reconfigure these to be cruise control buttons by actually rewiring the ECM to see these as cruise control buttons. That is, taking the output of these buttons and sticking them into pins 22, 34, and 35. Of course, in his demonstration, he only uses pins 22 and 35 and ignores pin 34, which does not give you the ability to resume and accelerate your cruise control, which is definitely a compromise, but I'm saying that I'm doing this for $50. Considering the difference is going to be about $200, I'd say that's worth it. So I went out and got my wiring sheets for the bike, and I found that the siren on and off switch and the siren momentary switch use the wires coded pink black and tan black. These go back to pins 9 and 10 on the connector 24A. The opposite end, 24B, has these wires going to the siren amplifier. If you look for the siren amplifier connector, you get this. And that tells us that these pins that we need are on the slots 2F and 1F on the siren amplifier connector. So that gives us something to go on. So our plan is going to be to take these wires out of the siren amplifier connector and reroute them into the ECM on those pins 22 and 35. So that's the plan. Now let's get back to the bike. So before we begin, let's talk about what tools we're going to need. The first thing we're going to need is a socket set, and this is purely just for the police seat. If you have a regular seat, you'll just need a set of Allen keys. Also, to remove the battery cover, you'll need a set of security Torx bits. You're also going to need a couple of wiring supplies, such as 2 strands of wire, I've decided to use the colors red and gray because these are the only colors I have. But you want to have two different colors of wires just to help yourself out later when you need to figure out which one is which. So I've cut two kind of strands that are about, I'd say, 1.5 feet long. This is pretty much like more than I would need, but I'm just cutting out a little bit more just to be safe. You need kind of a wire, just a combination crimper and stripper. These are quick splices. I prefer this to cutting and soldering just because these are reversible splices. They just have a little bit of a fang here. They crimp around the wire, make a quick kind of incision, and that's how they get their connection for the wire. They are totally removable. Do not damage the wire that bad. You would probably have to patch it up with electrical tape after you take these off. But that's pretty nice. And you're going to need a couple of these. These are Harley part 7260508. These are terminals. You need 2 of these. I have 4 because I know I'm going to mess up at least one of these. And to crimp these terminals, you're going to need one of these. This is a special crimper called a Molex Crimper. It has a special shape that goes specifically with these pins. I think they're also called open barrel crimpers. And you need one of these crimpers to make these crimps. If not, I can't really guarantee that this is even going to go into your Ecm connector. But this was about $10. The pins were about $10. I already had all this stuff. So I'd say in total this cost me about, I would say, $30. And here's the thing. I say I'm doing this for $50 because realistically, dealers will probably charge you another $20 to $30 to get your bike flashed. If they're a nice dealer, they might try and charge you $50 or $70 if they want to really, grab your wallet and yank it out of your pants kind of deal. My dealer, they personally did it for free because I go over there a bit. So I'm only in this $30. You can probably do this for $50. And that's it with all the tools you're going to need. So now we're going to begin with removing the seat. Right here, you have a pin that you're going to want to pull. This is a safety pin, keeping the seat connected to the air spring. You also at this time can remove the 2 bolts for the weather cover. Finally, holding the seat together at the front of it is a long bolt and nut. Once you've got that removed, you can actually just pull out the bolt and remove the seat. Now all we have in our way is just the weather guard, so we can just lift that up and pull that right out. And now we have all the electronics exposed for the bike. Here we have the ECM, or ECU. This just pulls out pretty easy. You can ignore all this other wiring, but the main thing we want is right here. This is our siren connector, or what would go to a siren. If you do not have this on your bike and your bike is a police bike, it is most likely because the police department, when they sold the bike, they cut this connector. If you can find it, it routing down here, if you can find it cut off, I'm going to show you exactly what wires we're looking for. If you peel back this rubber protector, you can see here's the connector. Now if you remember, we're looking for a pink and black and tan and black wire, and it is supposed to be on pins 1F and 2F. I see the wires right here. This is the tan one, this is the pink and black one. And if I were to just count, starting from here, this is column A, B, C, D, E, F, 1F, 2F. So these are our wires that we're looking for. Okay, so now we're actually going to put our splices on. I went ahead and put one on just off camera just to see how it would go on. I was thinking I wouldn't need the crimper, you kind of do. So these are the blue splices. This is the medium size out of the 3. I was thinking I was going to need the small, but I'm going to go safe and use the medium size first, just so I don't accidentally cut really deep into this cable to the point where if I take this splice off, the cable might fall apart. So I'm going to line the splice on, make sure that the pink cable is in between the two fangs. I'm going to close it up, kind of press it down as much as I can to get a little bit of a bite started. And I'm just going to open up my crimpers. It's a little hard to do when the crimper isn't spring-loaded. Just going to give it a light squeeze. And I could feel it lock up. So there's the splice. So I got 2 splices, and now we have our wires that we are actually going to tap into the second half of the splice, which looks something like this. So this is what we need. This goes over the connector like that, and this is just a regular crimp. So I'm going to put my red wire in here, just push it till I see that the wire is right into that middle section, and I'm just going to give it a crimp. And that's all you need. You can do it twice if you want. And this red one is going to go on the pink one, just to keep kind of the colors together. And I'm just going to cut it here, and I will do the tan one too. Okay, we're making progress now. We got our wires tapped into our siren connector, and now what we're going to do is work on the ECM. But before we do that, we're going to disconnect the battery. So I'm going to move everything out of the way. I got 2 security Torx bits right here. I'm just going to use my little screwdriver and get those loosened up. Now what you're left with is a bit of a complicated piece to get off. It requires both downwards force and for you leftwards force to get it off. So you're going to have to pull it up, push down, and forward to get it off. And it would be nice if your bike was in neutral or in gear when you did that, because mine just rocked like it was going to fall off the stand. But now we have our battery. Okay, so I went ahead and disconnected my neutral terminal, and I isolated the wires with electrical tape to make sure they don't just bump into each other. So now we can actually take a look at the ECM connector. By the way, you might want to leave your bike off for a good minute or two, even cycle through the ignition switch like you can hear me doing. Make sure the bike is just totally out of power. So the ECM connector looks like this. Has a bit of a, actually let me make sure the camera is focused on this. Okay, so there's a lot of obviously safety mechanisms on this connector to make sure it doesn't just accidentally come undone. The first one is this red piece. You squeeze it in like this, pull it out. Then you have a lever mechanism, which requires you to push in here, and the lever mechanism will open like that. And you want to pull it all the way to the side, and then you can just disconnect the ECM like that. You want to put this in a nice safe place, maybe even cover up this section to make sure no dirt gets in your pins. And we're going to really be focusing on this connector right here. Okay, so now we have our ECM connector. Originally there was a zip tie holding this connector kind of in place like this. I just cut this off with a razor blade. And now we're open to pull the connector apart. So I just have a little bit of a pointy tool, which I'm going to put right in the back here to kind of release the connector. Alternatively, if that's not going to work, I can actually just push it forward. There we go. And it will just pop apart like this. And just with a little bit of wiggling and pulling, this will actually come apart. There we go. So here is our, big connector that goes into our ECU. And these blue bits, these blue kind of placeholders, are all the pins that are not used on this connector. So we actually need to find out what pins are pins 22 and 35. So 21 actually right, or 22 is actually right here in the middle. Now before I go and actually push the spacer out, I need to remove this green retainer right here, which I can do by getting a little pointy object and just using it to slide out the retainer just like this. You'll notice there's a long and a short end. Obviously it's not going to go back in the same, a different way, but just acknowledge the fact that there is a short and a long end. I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to get my paper clip. I'm going to put it in my pin 22 hole. I'm just going to give a little push. There we go. If I look on the other side, there's our pin. I'm actually going to push the paper clip in and follow it so that my paper clip is now bent and now taking the place of this pin. So I know exactly where I'm going to put my connector back in, or my replacement pin. Okay, before we continue, I want to inform you guys of a bit of a mistake I made with my wiring. So it turns out that when I was wiring from the siren connector, I used obviously the gray and the red wire like I said. But it turns out these wires are actually different diameter wires. The red one being a bit of a smaller diameter than the gray one. And as it turns out, when I was doing a little bit of test fitting, I noticed that the red wire, at least from the side it needs to go in, the red wire fits into the connector. I don't know if it's entirely obvious, but the red wire is just big enough to fit. The gray wire, however, will not go into this connector at all. The gray wire is just way too big. So for me, I'm actually going to go back and use the red wiring to completely replace the gray wire on my siren connector. And I'm just going to use 2 red wires because that's all I have. I'm just going to pay attention to my wires and make sure I get them right. But for you guys, when you do this, make sure your wiring is 20 gauge. That is the wiring that is in this connector, 20 gauge. Make sure your wire is not bigger than 20 gauge because you are not going to be able to get these wires into this connector. Just a note. All right. So I have crimped on one of the ECM terminals to this wire. You can see how it's open like this. This is what the crimp looks like. It becomes closed, and it kind of grabs both the wire and the exposed wire, the casing and the exposed wire. So now what we're going to do is we're going to push this into the open slot 22, and hopefully it's going to fit. Okay, so I now have our first wire in. And I'm not gonna lie, I've been working on this for probably about 30 minutes, just because this diameter wire, even the red wire, is just too big just to go in this hole. So I actually had to grease up this cable with dielectric grease just to get it to go in. And I already went through one connector because I messed it up. So you can see this connector has been put in. So I can now bring this to our siren connector. I believe, I'm going to double check, but I believe pin 22 goes to the tan and black connector. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that in right now. Okay, now we're ready to go with putting our second connector into this terminal. So I have it right here. Oh, I dropped it. I have it greased up with dielectric grease, not too much, just enough. And I've already taken out the blue placeholder plug for pin 35. So I'm just gonna put it in here. It slides in pretty well, but it gets stuck a bit. So you gotta kinda persuade it forward a bit. And I believe this one just went in. Yep. I'm gonna give it a little tug, and it's in. So that is our second wiring. If you notice, I actually switched to another brand of wire for this second one just because the first one, it was a really tough time. So this one I have to re-strip and put a quick connect on, but we're almost done.
Alright, so we are now ready to put our Ecm connector back together.
Hey guys, I'm recording this as I'm editing the video, and I noticed that when I'm recording the video of me putting back the Ecm connector together, I noticed that I did omit this green retaining pin in my recording when I put the Ecm back together. So I just wanted to make this little note saying to make sure you do not forget this retaining pin when you put the connector back together. Okay.
So I have the top here, and I'm going to make sure when I'm putting it back together that these wires that we installed come out the back with the rest of the wiring. So I'm just making sure that the cover doesn't snag any wires when you put it on, and of course it does want to do that. I'm making sure these two little feet slip into their holes, and I'm making sure our wires come out the back. Making sure nothing's in the way. It feels like it doesn't want to close, but that just might be the resistance of all the wires on top of it. And it looks like it's closed now. So I have another zip tie that I'm just going to wrap around here and tie closed. What I am going to do is I'm going to try and get this rubber cover back onto the siren connector. I'm going to kind of wrap these splices into each other, or make sure they're laying flat so I can kind of get this cover back over. If I can't do it, I might end up cutting the cover up in some little slots, but it looks like I might be able to do it. Yep, okay. So there we go. We have our two wires coming out of our siren connector. We have our two wires going into our Ecm connector. Really, we are ready to put the bike back together, and I am actually just going to cut this out. I'm going to put everything back together. I'm going to reconnect the battery, and I'll see you there. Okay guys, I got the bike all back together except for the seat, just to show you what everything looks like now that the everything's put back in place. The ECU put back into place, battery's connected, and I'm gonna be honest with you, this is really quite a discreet mod. All I have is this red wire lying around, which if you were to just take the extra time to heat shrink this wire, you probably wouldn't even notice that it's there. So this is a pretty discreet mod, and I'm actually gonna give you the first look at if this is going to work or not. And there we go. We got the cruise light coming on, red telling us that it's ready to go. If this bike was running, I could just hit the siren button and that would enable the cruise and we'd be cruising. Unfortunately, I don't have any kind of helmet cam to show you the cruise working in action on this bike, but I'm sure you can imagine what it'd be like. You know, you set your cruise and you forget it. So that's it, guys. The mod's done. So I just installed cruise control in this 2012 Police Road King for under $30. You guys could easily do it for $50. If you got the time and you want to save money, this is a pretty darn cheap way to add cruise to a police bike. See ya.